everybody know who we are. I'll start with Becca. She works for Mid-Columbia Fisheries Enhancement Group. And then we have, it's Becca Wassell, yeah. Then we have Lael, who works for the Kittitas County Conservation District. And we have Scott Nicolai, who works for Yakima Nation Fisheries. And Jane Creech, who works for Washington State Department of Ecology. So I thought we would start by having each of you just mention what your title is and a brief bit about what you actually do, because the students are going to be interested in jobs, not necessarily yours. They're not coming for your jobs or anything, right? But they're going to be interested in what you do, because a lot of our students in the environmental management class want to go into working in most likely public service work, but also with nonprofits and environmental management, which I didn't know much about before this class, also is something that private businesses engage in large part to get public funding for various projects that they're associated with, because they tend to work as contractors a lot doing projects in environmental management. So I think most of the students though are interested in more what you guys do. So Becca Wassell, do you want to begin?
Yeah, I'm happy to tell folks a little bit about what we do. So my name again is Becca Wassell, and I'm the Yakima Basin Program Director for a nonprofit called Mid-Columbia Fisheries Enhancement Group. And we're one of 14 regional fisheries enhancement groups in Washington State. We were actually chartered by the legislature in 1990 to be nonprofit, non-regulatory organizations that can work with landowners in a voluntary capacity to make habitat better for salmon and steelhead and native fish. So that's our focus. We also do a lot of education with communities and with school children, and a lot of partnership building with other groups. My job specifically is to identify restoration projects, to work with the landowners and with our partners to decide what would go into the projects and how we would fund them, and then to implement them on the ground.
Thank you. Lael, you want to tell us what you do?
Sure. Again, I'm Lael. I'm the district manager for the Kittitas County Conservation District. Conservation districts are a unit of local government. We're governed under RCW 8908, which really describes what we can do, and it covers basically any natural resource issue that you could come up with. Really, it's an interesting read if you go look at 8908, particularly the preamble. We are one of 45 conservation districts in the state, and I think there's about 2,000 of us in the nation. So we're all across the nation. We, again, are a unit of local government, so we're, I think, technically a political subdivision of the state. We primarily work with private landowners on natural resource issues, whatever those might be. And so we have programs we're working on, fish screening, fish passage barriers, irrigation upgrades, forestry, rangeland, you name it, we worked on it. So as a district manager, it's kind of my job to, I report directly to a board of supervisors, so there are 5 of them. They're all local landowners. 3 are elected locally, 2 are appointed by the Conservation Commission. So I have 5 bosses all the time. So it's an interesting position to be in, and they delegate a few things to me as a district manager, including representing them at any variety of events or working on any particular planning processes, like the integrated plan. Although my role in it is way down low, we're not one of the big dogs, so to speak, in the integrated plan. So we have a staff of, county me, there's 7 of us, soon to be 8. We have a job advertised right now, if anyone's interested. So go to our website.
Okay. Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Sure.
Scott Nicolai, tell us about yourself.
I'm Scott Nicolai. I'm a habitat biologist with Yakama Indian Nation Fisheries program. I've worked there since 1991. And I'm in charge of protecting, restoring, assessing habitats for cold water fish in the Yakima Basin, in the area that's not included on the reservation. So that's around 5 million acres, I believe. It's a huge area. I have a staff of 6 folks working for me. And so the protection part of it is we're involved in acquisitions of lands, not so much these days. We were really big into that for a while, and it's less of a role now. But the other part of protection is the regulatory side. So when a development proposal comes in and it has the potential to degrade habitat for salmon and steelhead, we are involved in trying to mitigate that impact. Then the other thing we are really involved in is restoration work, trying to make the streams more functional for salmon and steelhead. We do a little bit of assessment work, not a lot. Mainly we're focused on restoration.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Jane Creech, tell us about yourself.
Sure. Again, I'm Jane Creech. I work for the Washington State Department of Ecology. I'm actually in the water quality program. The Department of Ecology as a whole is set to protect the lands and waters of the state of Washington. And we are actually under federal mandate from a variety, for the agency as a whole, we're under federal mandate from a variety of laws because we cover everything from air pollution to oil spills to cleaning up contaminated sites to our water resources program, which helps manage the water in the state to make sure that there's enough water for the people, fish, and agriculture all at the same time. And then the water quality program that I'm in has the goal of keeping the water clean for the state, and as a short phrase for that is keeping the water swimmable and fishable so that both people and fish can enjoy it and other critters. What my group, the water quality group, does in particular is we are a regulatory agency, so we've got quite a handful of state laws that again are federally mandated down through the Federal Clean Water Act, and then were adapted by the state to kind of match and then maybe expand upon the federal laws. So as part of us being a regulatory agency, we need to enforce those laws where necessary. We also have a large amount of funding that we're able to give out to different groups. In fact, a lot of the same groups that are here next to me that I'm lucky to get to work with. My particular job is to work with communities to work on water quality cleanup plans, and those are also called total maximum daily load plans, or TMDLs. And what we do there is to work with the community groups to help them understand what the applicable water quality laws are that are in their area, and then also what needs to be done to get the water cleaner. And then once we've gotten past that stage, find the funding to get that water cleaned up. So
Thank
that's
you.
it.
Well, that's a good transition point, because I'll note that as I was getting underway trying to figure out what the Yakima Basin Integrated Plan, or IP, or YBIP, anything else? We have to know these things because students are going to come into contact, and that's one of the things for me that's been hardest as I've learned about environmental management and what you guys and your groups do is you guys have these various ways of referring to projects that I'll be like, what's that? Is that the same as this? And so it's okay, we all have to get used to that. But we talked in the, so last module in the class was about different cultures' approaches to what we call environmental management in our culture, about how different groups have different cultures, different societies over the course of history have approached what we do. And then as we transition into this module, we're looking at cooperation, because, you know, throughout the world, successful environmental management has to do with people understanding each other. And so Jane had talked to me several weeks ago about how she, when she works with actual landowners, it's a better approach, right, to come to them asking for cooperation than it is to just jump in with fining or other things of that nature. So does anyone here have anything that they would share about working cooperatively with the communities that you work with, the human communities? Anybody ever had an experience that really comes to mind about working with the community and sharing with the community what your organization does, and try to get people aware and participating rather than, I guess, ignoring or resisting what you do?
I think Anna's Monastache project is a good place to start.
Well, conservation districts, that's what we do. We are non-regulatory. So everything that we do with landowners is on a voluntary basis. All of the projects that we work on, big or small, require the landowners to be, to want to be involved and to want to implement the practices, whatever they are. So that's what we do all the time. The Monastache project is, I guess, it's kind of an old project now because it's been around for quite a while, but when Mid-Columbia steelhead were listed as a threatened species, 99?
98.
98, and I think was critical habitat was then in 2000, it was something like that, the timeline of it. We had farmers here who knew that they were going to have to address screening and passage at their irrigation diversions, and they knew that because the regulatory agencies, which would be Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife and at the federal level, National Marine Fisheries Service, there was a producer meeting here in town, and their enforcement people came and said there's fines and jail time for a take of a species. And so we had landowners come to us and say, I think I need a fish screen, and I'm not a fish biologist, I didn't know anything about fish screens. But we took their names and we started working on it. And in the meantime, in the Monastache watershed, which had unscreened diversions and fish passage barriers, the Washington Environmental Council sent a draft letter of intent to sue. And so they sort of started their own process there in the Monastache. There was a meeting, and I wasn't there, I don't know if you were there, at the cattleman's office, where all of the parties who were involved in this, the Washington Environmental Council, and then all of the folks they sent letters, this draft letter of intent to sue, were there with their attorneys. And they had the first meeting and started talking about it, and they established a steering committee. And we were a little bit on the sidelines of that. That's a very regulatory conversation, and that's not what we do. But when they were able to come up with a plan, they went to the legislature, the steering committee did, were able to get funding that actually came through Department of Ecology. And then they asked us to facilitate the funding and the project, so that was kind of our beginning in it, which was about 2003. And I think we all thought we had a plan, but it wasn't really, it didn't have all the details worked out. And so the process really stumbled by about 2005 or 2006, like everything had sort of fallen apart, how we were going to make this all work. And so we brought in a professional facilitator, actually the Washington State Conservation Commission, who's our link to the state. They provided this person who's very talented at no cost to us, which was great. And he spent a year with the group, and the first thing that we did was, at his urging, was figure out who the decision makers are, because we didn't have decision makers at the table having discussions on the steering committee. So it was staff from the Yakama Nation, staff from Fish and Wildlife, staff from Ecology, but not the people in those decision-making positions. So pulled in the Southeast Region Director for Fish and Wildlife, same for Ecology, Phil is the natural resources
Director of Natural
Yeah.
Resources for Yakima
for the
Nation.
Yakamas. Yeah, and so then our facilitator was able to have everyone at the table, because the farmers had been at the table, the irrigators, this whole time, able to make decisions for their operation. They were the decision makers, but they weren't talking to the decision makers from the other agencies. And so once that happened, then I think it was billed as an historic agreement in 2007 for Menashtash, able to figure out a plan to move ahead, how diversions were going to be consolidated, where fish screens were going to go in, where the funding was going to come from, who was going to do what, how we were going to address in-stream flow, all of those issues. And so it was a really interesting process to be part of, in sort of a mini version of the integrated plan, just for the Menashtash.
The evolution was really amazing. To go from a lot of acrimony at the front end to really working together productively to resolve some issues. It took a long time, but the end result, I think everyone's pretty happy with.
Yeah, well, so that, our involvement started in 2003, and it wasn't until 2016 that the last fish passage barrier finally came out of
Wow.
Menashtash and opened it up.
And
so-
Steelhead came back.
And Steelhead came back, documented.
After
Yeah.
100 years of, right? Approximately?
Yeah, you can make that number.
Yeah.
The big diversion that came out was rebuilt in the 50s. I don't know what it looked like before that, so it's possible there were some, but
A few slipped by.
After
we
a
can
really
say-
long time.
Yeah, after
Yeah.
a really
Came
long
back.
time, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a safe,
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's an accomplishment. So what about in your,
Well, it was interesting, I've not thought specifically of the parallels, but there's a project that's underway right now in the lower part of the Yakima Basin, right where the Yakima River meets the Columbia River, that deals with water quality and fish passage conditions in the Yakima Delta. And there are a lot of parallels, especially for that lesson about making sure the people at the table are the decision makers. Mid-Columbia Fisheries and Benton Conservation District, so the Kittitas County Conservation District's counterpart in Benton County, started looking at water quality in the Delta area and looking at how fish move through there in 2010. And we started pulling community members in for public open houses and doing scoping, letting people know there's a problem here, fish are dying because they can't use the right path through the Delta, water is too hot. But we didn't have the policy decision makers at the table at that point. We were just other stakeholders trying to get other stakeholders to agree with us on things. When Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife became sort of the lead for the project, then suddenly the conversation progressed forward with a lot more momentum. And we're still in progress. Fish are still dying at the confluence of the Yakima and the Columbia River because of the way the landforms are there. But it does seem like we're closer to an on-the-ground project because we now have the right people at the table. So that's a good lesson. I should have asked you earlier in the process.
and is this because of the integrated plan, or how does the integrated
So
plan?
I think in that case it is. So the Yakima Delta project was already a priority for fish managers in the Yakima Basin. But as the Habitat Subcommittee of the Yakima Basin Integrated Plan began meeting and identifying priority work, it was increasingly apparent that any work we do throughout the Yakima River upstream of the Delta depends on fish surviving their migration through the Delta. So that's really key. We have to improve survival there to make our other investments make sense. So that project was then identified as a priority for the Yakima Basin Integrated Plan,
Great.
which helped get more people to the table.
How has the tribe and the Yakama Nation been involved with, it was hard for me to find information online to see what kind of projects that they were working on. I know Anna told me a little bit about their partnership with the Yakama Nation. Do you, Scott, do you know much about the integrated plan projects that the nation has been working with?
Yes, I'm right in the middle of one of the elements of the integrated plan. There's 7 elements, and if somebody asked me what to name them all, I would not be able to do that right away. It would take me a while, but the element that we are really involved in is just stewarding habitat for fish and wildlife. So an example is the Teanaway watershed. Approximately a third of that entire watershed was purchased and is now protected under the auspices of the integrated plan. About 50,000 acres is owned by Washington DNR and has an easement on it by Washington Fish and Wildlife. That land looks beautiful, but it is actually, through the lens of fish habitat and stream function, it is horrifically degraded from the legacy of logging and grazing and roads and railroads and on and on and on. So we are in the middle of doing stewardship projects on that landscape. We have so far implemented 2 phases of work and affected about 3 or 4 miles of stream restoration. This summer, one of my staff is going to be just about living up there because of all the work that we have funded right now for additional stewardship on the tributaries. So that's an example, but we are also working in other areas under the auspices of the integrated plan. The Little Natchez River is a big place that needs a lot of stewardship, mostly on federal land. The Nature Conservancy, which is a non-governmental organization that is international and involved in a lot of conservation work, is a large landowner in the headwaters of the Little Natchez, and there's a lot of work going on there. We are trying to get traction on the big floodplains of the Yakima River here in Kittitas County. Kittitas County Public Works is involved. They are short-staffed. Everybody's, what I say is capacity limited. We don't have enough people to plan and manage and permit and design and all the stuff that goes into a project. So we are trying to get more capacity for doing stewardship on those mostly right now privately owned floodplains. We are trying to strategically acquire, protect, acquire easements to enable long-term management of those areas for fish and wildlife. And that's going to be very collaborative. The county and the city of Ellensburg are going to be involved in that, and a lot of work to do. We will be hiring, hopefully if things come together, a couple of positions for work in the Kittitas Reach and also down in the Wapato Reach, which is another place that the Yakima is a big area, and there's a lot of opportunities to manage things better.
Great, thank you. Anyone want to speak to the one thing I'm interested in knowing, because I've seen the stakeholders being private landowners, and then you've got the government agencies involved, the bands and tribes, the Yakama Nation.
Mm-hmm.
What's the place of an NGO or a nonprofit in working with these other organizations? Do you have as much of a seat at the table as like a government agency like Ecology or a conservation district?
No, not at the table. And it's funny that you use that because the integrated plan's format for meetings is very specifically a table of a working committee and then a periphery where attendees come to the meetings. Mid-Columbia Fisheries as a nonprofit organization is an implementer of the work that is identified as a priority in other plans that the government agencies have put together, but is not an organization that helps to craft the policy. For the integrated plan, there have been a couple of non-governmental organizations that were engaged in the crafting of the plan and in the implementation, and those were American Rivers and the Wilderness Coalition. Who remembers?
The Wilderness Society.
The Wilderness Society. So there were a couple of non-governmental organizations engaged from the beginning.
And you mentioned at the table, and then there's this periphery. Are those the quarterly meetings of the Yakima River Basin Water Enhancement Project Work Group that you're referring to?
Yes, there are those, and then there are also meetings of subcommittees under that.
Okay. And it was, Jane, you mentioned to me that that I should come to the Yakima River Basin Water Enhancement Project Work Group meetings to learn more, and that it's open to the public, right?
Yes.
So students can go, and
Absolutely.
what gets discussed there?
A whole,
Everything.
basically the progress of what's going on with, the importance of the Yakima River Basin Water Enhancement Project, or YARVWEP, as we often call it to make it
YARVWEP.
shorter, is that it is federal legislation that began in the 70s, I think, is that right? And it had a phase one that was about basically protecting the water that they had at the time. Phase two, I think, was focused on habitat. And so phase three actually is the Yakima Integrated Plan.
Okay.
So there's a direct overlap between those two. And so generally, the Yakima Basin Integrated Plan receives a lot of money, like millions of dollars from both the federal legislation coming through YARVWEP and then also from the state. And so it's very highly funded. And so a lot of the meetings discuss early on, like, what's the status of the funding. There will be delegations that go back to Washington, D.C. regularly to meet with different legislators, both representatives and senators, to try and get the legislation promoted through Congress and so on. And so there's a lot of that interaction. It's a fairly high-level project, you know, that's nationally known at this point. Also at the meetings, they'll discuss the status of projects that are also multi-million-dollar projects. There's one right now, and you guys can probably enlarge on this better than me, but it's a very unique, designed fish escapement or smolt escapement project. It's an elaborate spiral-shaped design where the smolts are going to escape out of the Cleellum Dam, or Lake Cleellum, over Cleellum Dam. They're slightly raising that dam for more water storage, and then they also need the smolts to get out. And it's, so, you know, anyway, they discuss projects like that. There's subcommittee reports, and I think students would find it really fascinating.
And there's food.
And food, right, and there's food, yeah. And there's a lot of really interesting people that go to the meetings too. It's a very wide range of municipal and county folks and all these different agencies that are here, and a number of other federal and state agencies and Forest Service. A lot of work that's being done on the integrated plan, at least in the upper watersheds, is all on Forest Service land. And so there's this real interesting relationship with the Forest Service, like there's all the work going on, and the Forest Service periodically says, by the way, it's our land, just want to make sure everybody's paying attention. The water within the reservoirs, though, belongs to the reservoirs themselves belong to the Bureau of Reclamation, so you've got that federal and interrelationship going on too. So.
Yeah, one important thing during those meetings that Jane mentioned is the fish passage at the reservoirs is a big part of the integrated plan. So that the 5 storage reservoirs, including Cleellum, and another one that folks who drive to Seattle drive right by is Lake Kittitas. Those reservoirs, when they were constructed without fish passage. So the Sockeye Run, for example, and the Yakima Basin had a really robust run of sockeye. Tribal members call them blueback. They're one of the favorite fish. They're delicious. They were completely wiped out because they require a lake system as part of their life history, and when the dams were built, they were gone. So Cleellum, being the biggest, was slated for fish passage early on. So they're in the middle of, the Bureau is in the middle of that right now. The fish carousel that Jane talked about is to get the the juveniles out of the system. It's a challenging project. The United States has never done anything like this. The challenge being that it's a reservoir, so it has a fluctuating pool level. And you never know from one year to the next where the pool's going to be when the bulk of the smolts want to leave. So it had to have outlets, just like the parking lot carousel at SeaTac Airport is the one I always think about. So you drive up and you can get off of that at multiple levels, and that's the design, and that's well over $100 million to construct, to design and construct that. The good news is that there's lots of good habitat above Lael Reservoir, lots of great sockeye habitat. The tribe that I work for has been reintroducing a run of sockeye up there for the last probably 6 years now, after about 100 years. So it's very, very exciting. And yeah, fish passage is a big deal. Eventually, the intent is, over the course of the plan of 30 years, that we will have fish passage at all 5 reservoirs.
I know one of the interests that students had in talking, and that they were going to get to ask about through their questions was about dam removal. And I don't know if we have time right now to go into that in great depth, but are any of you or your organizations or agencies anticipating dam removal, or are you just dealing at this point in time with what has to be done to work with what's already there?
I haven't heard proposals for dam removal for the major irrigation dams in the Yakima system. The focus of restoration and recovery efforts has been how can we move fish through and around those dams while maintaining their capacity to manage irrigation flow for the basin. So it's been a more nuanced, compromise type approach to that.
Yeah, the Yakima is one of the most intensively irrigated basins in the country. There's 500,000 acres of irrigated land, I believe, something like that. There's a lot of livelihoods relying on irrigation with climate change. The Climate Impacts Group out of the University of Washington saying, we're not sure what the amount of precip is how that's going to change, but we do know that it's going to come as rain. And right now, we have an amazing amount of water stored as snow in the headwaters. From your questions, I could tell that the students are already aware of that. So, in order to keep agriculture viable, and it's a huge deal in this basin, we need more storage. So we are not talking about removal of the large dams. The exciting thing is we are removing small dams, right? Diversion dams. Anna talked about Monastash, and there are small dams there that completely blocked upstream passage of fish. They're not really super exciting to read about in the Seattle Times because they're only maybe 6 feet tall. We're going to remove this dam, but the implications for fish are huge, right? Monastash, we got 30 miles of steelhead habitat back and a bunch of habitat for coho salmon. So,
Great.
I might even make a plug for the very smallest of dams, which are the ones that you see when you're out camping or playing in the river in summertime. We have a habit of building rock dams in our rivers, especially when they're low around here. And it turns out those can actually block returning bull trout or Chinook salmon from making it to their spawning grounds. We have river systems where we think bull trout populations have been wiped out because of these recreational activities.
Wow.
So my pitch to your students is when you're out there this summer, make sure that those dams all have fish passage, or go ahead and just take them out.
Take them out?
Yeah.
Good, good. All right. So we've touched on snowpack and climate change, and one issue that we haven't touched on, and that there was the most interest in this question, which was is YBIP equipped to handle increasing human populations in the Yakima Basin and the consequential rise in water consumption? Does anyone know about that?
Thanks for sending the questions out earlier, so I had a minute to think about that. YBIP, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but YBIP isn't addressing that as much as other state legislation and decisions. One of them is, I think it was in 2009, Department of Ecology was sued by a private group within Kittitas County saying, you guys can't keep, and this is from our water resources group, who permits what we call exempt wells, which were, and still are in the rest of the state, wells where if a person buys a piece of land, they can go put a well in and they can pump 5,000 gallons a day out of the aquifer that they punch their well into. And the group in Kittitas County said, you can't keep doing that, we're going to run out of water in this county. Not only are we depleting the aquifer, we're also depleting the streams because the aquifers and the streams are connected. And so Department of Ecology said, yeah, you're right, we really need to think about that harder because we are getting a lot of new homes built, and this is where it ties in with the population increase. So at that point, they put a complete stop on any new wells, which, needless to say, really upset a lot of folks who had just bought property that wanted to build houses. Over time, that evolved and has been more tailored to the community itself, or I should say to the county, to where there's some areas that are wetter than other areas, and so on. And so now the county has taken management of this water bank, is what they're now calling it, the Kittitas County Water Bank, and it depends on how many folks are applying for water rights, what part of the county they're applying for it in, and other attributes that I won't go into here. But so it's a very definite way of trying to make sure that the water resources are controlled, and so that as the population grows, it won't expand beyond the water that's actually available. So.
Well, I think that's all we have time for, except I wanted to ask if any of you have, want to make a little plug for or want to explain to students how they can find out more about internships or maybe volunteer opportunities, ways that they can get involved in networking and maybe eventually get connected to a career.
Yeah, so Mid-Columbia Fisheries has a structured internship program that we offer each summer, and we're hiring interns right now. It is a volunteer position, but we still say hiring.
Okay.
And the interns that work with us get to work with lots of different agencies on a variety of projects. So they support a lot of our partners in doing data collection and some fish salvage and some public education. So I would encourage people who are interested to go to our website, which is midcolumbiafisheries.org, and apply. We'd love to have them.
And I will post information about all your organizations too, so what about you, Anna?
So Becca's program's been great because we've picked up people when
A
we
lot
hired,
of people.
yeah,
They keep hiring our people.
yeah, that had worked with Becca. So
Yeah.
it's a really good starting place for folks. We don't do a lot of hiring. I feel like I've done a lot in the last couple of years, just staff turnover and other things. We do have a position advertised right now. I don't know how soon your students will see this. We're reviewing applications on April 27th for the first time. It is a temporary position, but it's an interesting new one. We've thrown right in the middle of learning how to do conservation planning with individual landowners under the guidance of experienced planners. But it's a good opportunity to get your foot in the door, and that's posted on our website right now.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Yakima Nation got anything?
So for tribal members, there are lots of opportunities for internships in the fisheries and wildlife and water program and other natural resource programs. For non-tribal members, what I encourage folks to do is to talk to Becca and also to look at the Washington Conservation Corps. We contract with the Corps. We have a crew that works for us full-time and another crew that works part-time. And if you love working outside, if you love planting trees and getting your hands dirty and doing stuff that's good for habitat, that is an excellent place to start. You get a lot of exposure to a lot of different projects if you're working for us, and for a lot of the different crews. They have about 45 or 50 crews statewide. You earn minimum wage and you get a stipend for college if you have publicly sourced grants or loans rather that you're going to be paying on. You get a deferral on the interest during your time, and then the stipend that you earn, which is around $5,500 for a year, can go right toward paying off that loan. It's a great place to start. I hired somebody here recently who actually worked for Becca and then did an individual placement with the Washington Conservation Corps, which actually is affiliated with the AmeriCorps, so it's a national affiliation.
What about ecology?
And Department of Ecology is regularly hiring people. We're a fairly good-sized agency. You can look at our new website and just look for the jobs link on there, and we do hire a number of people right out of college. We have an internship program. It's typically not advertised on the jobs page, however. A lot of times your best bet there is to say, I want to be working in a certain program, like I'm really interested in air quality, or I'm really interested in water resources or whatever, and then contact that program directly and find out about it that way. Because a lot of times those are slightly more informal, but we definitely do have interns. And employees
Yeah.
right out of college, so.
And they pay really well.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah,
So
sure, yeah.
when it comes to contacting, would you guys be open to having students reach out? We're going to be doing some case study research toward the end of the class, and just in general, if people have questions, is it okay with you if they contact you directly?
Absolutely, and also every year Scott helps to host the Yakima Basin Science and Management Symposium on campus here.
Good one.
Good plug.
And
When?
It's June 13th and 14th this year, and it's in Science 1. And it's a really great opportunity to get an overview of the different work that different folks are doing in the basin.
Yeah, and I'm a Central grad. I love talking to students because even though that was 30 years ago, it seems like it wasn't 30 years ago. And I can really relate to young folks who are passionate about the outdoors and stewardship and natural resources and all that stuff. And I really am motivated to help folks. I was the first person in my family to go to college, and I had major self-doubt back then. And so if you want to talk, give me a jingle and let's have a cup of coffee.
Sounds good. Great. Thank you. Thank you all so much for sharing your time this morning and giving the students a taste of reality in what you do. Thank you.